some pretty dramatic new polling out from CNN, which I think is very important because it's supposedly apolitical and it's also the story of the entire political dynamic that we're living in today. Let's throw some of that up there on the screen. It says, which comes closer to your view about where the U.S. stands in the coronavirus outbreak? The worst is behind us versus the worst is yet to come. You can see that the worst is behind us number has trended downward since May and June, now in most recent polling showing 40%, and the worst is yet to come at 55%. I think that is a dramatically significant number considering the hell that the last 5 months have already been. Majority of Americans say hasn't even been, that hell is a long, long time coming. I think even more so, and this is what's bad for Trump, 7 in 10 Americans, according to this poll, feel embarrassed about the way that the United States has handled the coronavirus outbreak.
Wow.
And 62% of the public says that Trump could be doing more to fight the outbreak.
And I think that this also 79% saying that they're angry with the way that things. 79% of the country is angry at the way things are going. 51%, a majority of the country says that they are very angry at the way that things are going.
That is why I think you can poll issues, you can poll so many different other things.
Yeah.
I think these are the most important numbers in the entire election because this is as close to a one issue election as we'll have since 1860.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where it's where the polling stands on that matters more than the economy, matters more than everything else. The Pew Research polling we had from just a month ago, and things have gotten worse since a month ago, not necessarily in terms of corona, but how Americans feel about it, is 30% of Americans say their number one issue for them is the pandemic. Number one. Number two is the economy, which are intertwined, which means a majority of voters are voting on something based on what's happening with the pandemic. These are terrible numbers for Trump. Have to be honest. 62% of Americans say they think you could be doing more. Most people are angry about the way that you handled it. And 70% are embarrassed about how it has fared. I think these are, there's no way getting around it. It's terrible.
Yeah, absolutely right. We cover the numbers about, the record low number of Americans who say they're satisfied with the direction the country is going in, record highs saying that it's on the wrong track, all of those things. It's part of why, Biden hasn't really done much. This convention has been, in my view, lousy. It's probably not going to move the needle whatsoever. Ratings are down. It's, completely off track, focusing on all the wrong issues, completely unfocused. No one is actually focusing on the things that people want them to be. And yet, sort of by default, just because he's not the guy who's in charge right now, it gives Biden really a leg up. It's the opposite of what the normal dynamic is with an incumbent president. Yes. Usually that gives you a major advantage. But when you are the incumbent president in the midst of a crisis and you've utterly failed to deal with it, well, that dynamic kind of flips around. But I do think that those first numbers you put up, which showed not only that you have a majority of Americans saying that the worst is still ahead of us, but that number is ticking up again.
Upward.
That is trending upward again. And remember, this is even as now coronavirus numbers are going back down. Right? They're going back down right now. I think that reflects an utter lack of confidence that this government will be able to do anything effectively to get this under control and keep it in check. They've just given up hope that there's going to be any sort of a competent, capable response coming from the federal government that will help bring things back to normal. And so I think that's why you see those numbers ticking back up. And look, I feel the same way because even as you see the virus numbers going down, we're also seeing what's happening as some schools start to try to reopen and they're having to shut back down.
Disaster.
We know very much what could happen potentially when things get cold in the fall. We've always, from the beginning of this, expected that there very much could be a second wave, a second spike. We haven't even gotten through the first wave yet, and that is upon us already. So I think people are really justified in feeling like this thing could get worse, much worse before it gets better. And meanwhile, Congress is absent. No one's dealing with it. So you can understand why they have no confidence that the government's going to actually do anything because the government hasn't actually done anything.
It's been rudderless from the beginning. And Trump himself, I don't know if he'll ever be able to overcome downplaying the virus in February. I don't know if many Americans can forgive that. And if you look at that, even then, after we had about 60,000 deaths, the whole White House strategy was just to ignore coronavirus.
Just to pretend it wasn't happening.
Once again, I mean, if you're somebody who looked to that and said that those were the critical months where we should have done something about it, which is what I agree, you can look at what's happening at Notre Dame, at Michigan, at all these other campuses. These people have put in testing, trace, all that other stuff. It doesn't matter. After a certain point, when the virus is this widespread, it's just going to burn through people. And if you congregate, that's just how it's going to go until you have a vaccine. And a lot of people don't want to admit that. So we have to talk about risk mitigation. What are we willing to accept? What are we not willing to accept? How the economy and so much more. But it didn't have to be this way. You can look all around the world. They don't have the same problems. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
I think your point is a really important one about how people may never forgive him for not taking it seriously at the beginning. And that's not a theater thing. That's a real thing. Because what we've learned, and we knew it at the time, but we've really learned it now, is how critical those early days were. And how even just acting a week, 2 weeks, just a little bit earlier could have made such a difference in the trajectory. You see it really clearly in New York, where there was like some weird political turf battle between de Blasio and Cuomo in the early days, and they dithered in terms of shutting down. And that was a big reason why New York became the worst epicenter of the crisis, where the virus, originally showed up on the West Coast, in Washington, California. Washington State did a much better job locking things down early and getting on top of it. And so they never suffered nearly the outbreak that New York did. So those early days, it's not just a perception thing. It really mattered that they didn't take it seriously. And so I don't think people should forget that. I don't think they should forgive it, especially when the response, it's not like they've done anything really to make up for that response since then or showed any consistency of commitment to dealing with this. It's still like one day they may be taking it seriously, the next day they want to talk about boats and housewives or whatever. So I think that skepticism is entirely justified.
Completely agree. But this is very bad polling, and I think if I was looking at this, I would say that this might actually be more determinative of the outcome of the election than any single other issue. But I don't actually see a lot of people saying that. It's like, this is what is driving Americans at the polls, and I think it will continue to be all the way through November.
I think you're right about that. All right, we're going to have more Rising for you after this.